Hi there, I'm Madeline. This is my tutorial for a relaxed and comfy cropped knit look jumper with some long sleeves to keep you cozy and just a simple round neckline. So this knit look stitch is really easy when you get going, and it gives these nice vertical lines that I think are really flattering. And then we'll add some ribbing at the end of the sleeves and along the base to finish it off. So that's enough talking, and let's get started. We'll start off making the body pieces, so make a slip knot, whatever way you like to, and then we're going to chain the height for your body piece. So this will be the height from your shoulder to as long as you want the jumper to be, excluding the ribbing that we'll add on later. Now once you have that chain length, add one additional chain. Then we're going to work half double crochets back along the chain, skipping that last chain you just made. So carry along until the end of the row, and you should have the same number of half double crochets as chains you made to begin with. So once you reach the end, chain one, and then turn your work. Now on this row, we don't want to go into either of the two sides of the V-stitch on top. We want to go into this third loop at the back, which is like a little diagonal stitch that's behind. So once you've done one, you'll see that they become even easier to see as you go along. And so you can see that next one there is just at the back of the stitch, the third loop. And just continue along, doing one half double crochet in each of those all the way to the end. So on this last stitch here, I'm just going under the third loop and I'm picking up the back loop, or the front loop, sorry, because it's closest to you, of the very last stitch, because it just makes it a little bit more secure. So go under both the third loop and the front stitch, and then chain one and turn your work. Now for this one, we're just going to go into back loops only. So going into that back loop on that top V-stitch, the one furthest away from you, one half double crochet in each of those all the way along the row. Now you're just going to repeat these two alternating rows going along the back loop only and the third loop row until you have the width that you want for your shoulder. And now we can start the neckline shaping. So we've chained one at the end of the row, and what you're going to do is skip that first stitch and then work all the way to the end of the row as normal. And then at the bottom, we'll keep it straight. So work into all the stitches, back to the top again, turn your work, skip the first stitch again, just like you're doing here, and repeat this 5 times until you have a decreasing neckline. So now we've got this nice slant for the neckline, and we'll add some width to it by making a straight section to go along the middle. So we're back up at the neckline end of your work, and this is the really simple part again. We just add one half double crochet in all the rows, working along for the width that you need. I did 12 rows here for a comfortable fit around the neck, as I didn't want it to feel too constricted, but you might want to do a few more or a few less depending on how you want it to look and feel. Okay, so that is the straight section complete. Now all we need to do is match up the neckline. So in the last stitch of the row, add 2 half double crochets, then crochet all the way back down to keep the bottom end straight, and repeat this 5 times. So this is just the opposite of what we did before, so the neckline will slant upwards on this side with the increases. So when you're at the top, just make sure you work into both of the half double crochet stitches you just made. Okay, so now you have your symmetrical neckline. All that's left is to continue with that shoulder section, working one half double crochet into each all the way along for the same number of rows as you did initially. You'll then have a piece that looks like this, and you need to make 2 of these for 2 body pieces, and then we'll start on the ribbing. So here we are at the bottom straight edge of one of the body pieces. I didn't have enough yarn to continue working straight along, so I'm just starting a new piece of yarn here, but if you have enough, just chain 1 and keep going. So what we're going to do is add single crochets along the base to prep for adding the ribbing. So I'm going to add 2 crochets per line. What I mean here is that in the inside of your work there are these clear definitions where you did the 3rd loop rows, and I found it much easier to be consistent working along if I used these as a guide. So I worked into the 2 easiest spaces going along, which was this bigger hole in the 1st row that I just worked into, and then the end stitch in the 2nd row. So I hope that makes sense. I'll show you a couple of times. So if you look here, I'm going into that first kind of chunky stitch at the end, and then going into that top section working along. Okay, so when you've worked all the way along the bottom edge, chain 1 and then turn your work so the right side is facing you, and then we're going to chain the length for the ribbing. So I decided that I would do 10 stitches in total for the ribbing, so I'm going to chain another 10 so I have 11 in total. Then skipping that first stitch, work back along the row. So here I will do 10 single crochets, and if you've done more or less chains, then you will do 1 less single crochet than your total chain length. And once you reach the end of that row, you want to slip stitch into the next stitch available, and then slip stitch again into the one after that to start your next row from. So there I've slip stitched to join this row, and then I'm going to slip stitch into the next one along once the camera focuses and start off a new row. So when you start this row, go into the back loops only because we're making the ribbing effect. So wiggle your way into that first back loop only of the first stitch and work your way up the row. And when you get to the very last stitch, I like to just go onto both sides just to make the ends look more secure and a bit neater. Okay, so now just chain 1, turn your work, and we're just going to repeat that the whole way along. So a single crochet in the back loops only all the way down, slip stitch into the next single crochet along, and then slip stitch into the next one, and then start your next row all the way to the very end. So this is what it should look like in the end. It very slightly pulls the jumper in, which I like because it's a crop jumper. It gives it a bit more shape at the waist. Then once you have 2, we're ready to join them together at the top. So I just like to find the place where the shoulder bit becomes the neckline and just put them together with ideally a stitch marker is probably easier than this. I don't have any stitch markers and so I'm just using a paper clip, but it works pretty well. It's just for reference anyway and just to kind of keep it together as you're working. So I'm starting with a slip knot on my hook, and I'm just going to try and work in those ends as I go. So I'll just zoom in a little bit more so that you can actually see what I'm doing. I'm just going under the first major kind of gap on both sides. This is the same actually as the spaces you were working into when we were adding single crochets along the base. So that kind of big chunky stitch, which is the end of one row, and then I'm going to work into what is kind of feels like a top stitch on the second row along. So that's 2 per each of those sections that you can see that have the lines running down. So once you've reached your paperclip or stitch marker or whatever you've put in to remind yourself at the end, that's going to be your last single crochet to join the shoulders together. And once you have the 2 shoulders put together, you can now see you've got the neck hole, and you can just pop it over your head to check that it's comfortable at this stage. But now I'm just set it aside and we can get started on the arms. So starting with a slip knot as always, you're just going to chain the length that you want for the arms, excluding the cuff length at the bottom. So I chained 100, which is super long. You probably don't need as long as that. I just love ridiculously long sleeves. And now, however many chains you've done, add 1 more chain, and then skipping that chain, work back into the second chain from your hook, and work in a half double crochet, just like you did to start the body pieces, exactly the same. And what we're going to do is do that whole row of half double crochets, chain 1, and start doing the same knit stitch pattern that we were doing before. So you're going to add half double crochets into the 3rd loop for that first row, and then the next row along you're going to put in your back loop only half double crochets, and then you're just going to repeat that for the width of the jumper that you want. So I ended up doing 48 rows. That might be too much for you, but I like them to be really baggy under the arms and comfortable. So in total I ended up with this huge rectangle, which then we're going to add some ribbing to. So as always, I've chained one at the end. I'm just turning my work so that I can see the stitches to try and make it nice and neat as I go. But for this, because we're doing the cuff and we want it to bunch up and the actual sleeve is quite wide, we're going to do 2 together for each of these rows. So going under the same places as you did for the shoulders and for the base, put your hook through each row and join 2 together. So what you're doing is going into that first end of the row, going into the second immediately after, and then pulling through all 3 loops on your hook. So when you're finished, the end of the sleeve will be a bit bunched up and we can start adding the ribbing to it. So chain 1 and then turn your work so the right side is facing you, and then I'm going to do the same number of chains as I did for the ribbing at the bottom of the jumper. So I'm adding another 10 so that I have 11 in total. I'm also really missing my table because we just moved, and so now I'm actually crocheting on a piece of carpet on our floor and all the weight of the jumper is underneath, so it's really hard to hold on to everything and do the chain as well. So same as before, I'm just skipping that first chain, that last chain even, sorry, and just working 10 single crochets all the way back down, and then I'll meet you at the bottom to join. So once you've got to the end of that row, we're just going to slip stitch into the one that's immediately under where you were just working. It's kind of pretty obvious each time where it should go. And then, just like before, you're going to slip stitch into the next stitch along, and then work your row back up, putting half double crochets into the back loops only, and just repeat until you get to the other side of your sleeve. And just a quick reminder at the end to go under both stitches, both sides of the stitch, sorry, to make that end look a little bit more secure. And this is just one more demo of adding in the slip stitch at the bottom to the stitch that's kind of obviously underneath, and then popping into the next one along and continuing to finish off the entire cuff. And this is what you should have at the end. You've got your full sleeve length and you've got your cuff at the bottom. So now we can get started on just finishing off that neckline. So you're just going to start off with your hook with a slip knot already on, and then what I'm going to do is just work into that from that top right hand side of the side facing you. I'm just going to go into that first space next to where the shoulder seam is and add in a single crochet. And you can work in your yarn tail from when you put the shoulders together here, but I forgot to do that the first time. It just neatens it up and you've got less things to weave in at the end. So I like to put in a single crochet per row, so each time I decided to work into just to the left, just after that third loop row, so where you've got the really pronounced running V-stitch, and then to go into the top of what was your back loop only row, which kind of has an obvious gap at the top waiting for you to use it. So I'm just each time going into the same place, and as long as you're consistent with where you choose, it will look neat. Okay, so I just wanted to show you here working into the other side when you've reached the other shoulder seam, that I'm just picking up that yarn tail to work in as I go, and that I'm just adding in a single crochet into the last row on each side, so just working round that seam to try and make a nice smooth edge around the corner. And now we're back at the beginning, so you can see there that's where I started on the side of the shoulder seam, and instead of adding in another single crochet, which will look a bit bulky, when you cross over to the other side of the seam, just pop in a slip stitch. I realised it gone blurry here, so just started that bit again. So there, just putting in that last slip stitch, and then I'll just finish off with a nice long yarn tail to weave in and hide at the top. Now we have all our pieces sorted and we're ready to put the whole thing together. So I'm going to start at the bottom of the arms at the end of the cuff, and I didn't have enough yarn left to keep going, so I'm just starting a new yarn tail. And here I just decided to just pull it through from the other side and start off with a chain at the end to secure. And then once you've secured that, turn your work. You've got these two tail ends, and I'm just going to try and work them in nice and tightly as I go, so it just all collects together and looks neat. And so each time I'm just going to go into there's a chain stitch on one side, so I'm going to go into the full chain, and then on the other side I'm going to go into the back loop only, where there's actually a V-stitch possible. So I'm just finding that back loop straight along, and as you go up there's going to be 10 on each side, so you just pair them up and work your way all the way up the cuff, and I'll just meet you as we join the arm. So I've just finished putting all of the 10 together for the cuff, and now when you start on the arm, just pop into that very last space that you've got from the end of the row where you had your knit stitch, and then just start exactly the same thing. Go into the chain side and then go into the back loop only and work your way up the arm. It might be helpful as well to just check your stitches are all aligned and put in some markers further up the sleeve, so that it's easier for you to keep the right sections together as you go. And once that's all joined up, we can add the sleeve to the body. So I wanted a nice loose, relaxed feel on the arms of this jumper, so I decided to do each of these sections we've been talking about that have the lines on them, which are actually 2 rows, to 3 chains or stitches on the actual body piece. And this just means it's got a nice big armhole. I hate feeling like things are underneath my arms, especially if you're using like a chunkier material or wool material. So in total I had 48 rows, so halved over, that's 12 of those sections with the lines. And so I've counted out 36 stitches on each side. I'm just going to count the 36 on this other side quickly and speed this up so you don't have to watch me counting. And then I've put my stitch marker, my paper clip, through both sides before we get started. So now that I've actually got the paper clip in the right place, I'm going to take the sleeve, the bottom corner of the sleeve where you just made the seam, and I just finished off there. I'm just going to insert my hook through both sides of the body pieces and just do a slip knot to secure. So of course you just need to add one side of the sleeve to one side of the body pieces so you actually have a hole for your arm to fit through. So here I'm just lining them up, and then what we're going to do is start working them together. So I'm just going to pop into that first space on the sleeve, the chunky end of the row that we've been working before, and then I'm going to go into the back loop only of the stitches on the other side. So this will leave like a neat looking line on the edge of the body piece where it joins the sleeve. And so just pull that through and put in a single crochet like we always do. And so here I'm going into that space that we normally work into, that almost top chain, which is the second row in that first like segment we've been talking about with the in between the lines, and putting in a single crochet. And then I'm actually, before going into the next bit along, I'm going to go into this space that kind of appears next to it. It's like on the line of the rows, you can see it there hopefully, just beyond where you just went into, and go into that third chain. And so we're going to end up with that nice loose fit around the underarms, and hopefully comfortable around the shoulders. So now we've done one side, so we're going to join the other side of the sleeve with the other side of the body, and what I'm going to do is just work into the top of the next row, on the end of the row on the sleeve, and do the same thing, go into the other side of the body piece, going into that back loop, or actually in this case it's the back of the chain. And that will just make it look a bit more consistent. So just make sure you go straight into that first chain or side of the stitch just after you've done up the shoulders, and then it will just look nice and neat at the top. Now we're at the bottom of the sleeve, all the sleeves are attached to the body, and we're just going to continue working down the sides of the body in exactly the same way, just going into the back loop only of one side and the back of the chain on the other side, or you could just go completely under the chain stitch, it will still look fine, and continue all the way down until we have seams all the way around and your whole jumper is put together, and then you can just weave in any of these loose yarn tails that you have on the inside and you're done. And here's just showing you how it looks on the outside when you're all finished. So I really hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and if you do make this jumper, please do let me know below. I'd love to know if you have any comments or feedback, as I generally just like hearing from you guys. And if you did like this video, a like and subscribe would be great for helping me make more, and I hope to see you here again soon.